Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram live broadcast. I am proprietor Jason Haas. My guest this week is the third generation proprietor of Talley Vineyards and Talley Farms down in Arroyo Grande, and a friend and a guy who I admire greatly for his work both with wine and in the wine community. That's, of course, Brian Talley. So I will be inviting Brian to join shortly, but while we wait for people to sign on, as I always do, I want to share a few pictures of what we have going on here. So we are in this little interlude between some storms, but it's pretty stormy out there. This is from the top of one of our hills. You can see the clouds building to the west. We got 4 inches of rain last week. We got a couple tenths of an inch last night, and we're looking at maybe 4 more inches of rain tonight and tomorrow, which is great. It's exactly what we want at this time of year. The vineyard is in perfect shape for it. I'll share a few more pictures. You can see how deep the cover crop is. This is a block that we actually grazed with our flock just like a week ago. And you can see the flock in that same block, and it has already grown back. So this is the time of year where there's an abundance of food, and we're just trying to get the sheep through as many blocks as we can. To get ready for the rain, we have prepared our water catchment system. So this is one of our water retention basins that's at the low point in the vineyard with a kind of ray-oriented Counoise block in the back. But these are all empty now. We're ready to pump the water out of these as soon as they fill. And we're feeling good. This is the right time of year for a big storm, and we think we're ready. We are, however, closing our tasting room tomorrow. So don't plan to come and see us. We're trying to keep people, both our own people and our own customers, off the roads. In addition, we are getting ready to bottle a few fun things. So some of our lighter weight reds, so that includes our Grenache from 2023. It includes our Counoise from 2023. I love the color in this wine. And it includes our Talley Noir as well. So 3 of the lighter weight reds that we don't leave in barrel for as long. Those are all going into bottle in 2 weeks. If you're interested, I gave a preview of the Counoise in this week's blog because it's going out to Wine Club members this spring. Beyond that, not so much. We're pruning away. I have one picture of kind of the contrast between a pruned block, that's a Tannat vine in the front, and those are Grenache vines that are unpruned in the background. We're about halfway through pruning. We've had to pause we've gotten some rain, but we'll pick back up again when it dries out next week. And then one last photo, just to remind you that when it's not stormy here in the winter, it is just gorgeous. This is what it looked like last week. So it's really beautiful in between these storms, the white puffy clouds, everything impossibly green, just a lovely, lovely time of year. And then finally, last thing, if you were watching your emails and you're on our mailing list, you probably saw that we released our boxes of Patelin Rosé, the new vintage 2024 Patelin Rosé. These always go quick, so if this is something that you look forward to and you have not yet gotten one, consider this your warning. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to invite Brian to join, and look forward to our talk. Okay. This will hopefully be all as straightforward as it was when we tested it on Monday. Sure that I'm centered. Perfect. Hello, Brian.
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great. Is it raining down at in your place yet?
It's more like a heavy mist. We did get some rain last night, and it was fun to listen to your comments about the rain and what's going on out in your vineyard. It's really parallels a lot of what's happening here in Arroyo Grande.
For people who don't know, you're only 40 miles south of us, something like that.
Right.
So weather patterns are broadly similar, though the climate, you have a little more benign climate than we do.
Right. There
overall.
is this mountain range called the Santa Lucias between you and me. So.
Cool. Okay, so I mentioned in my intro right when I first started, I'm not sure if you were on yet, that I'm particularly excited to talk to you because there's obviously a lot of parallels in terms of multi-generational businesses, in terms of kind of branching into the world of wine growing and winemaking from another related field, but not exactly the same one. And I'm wondering, like, could you start by talking about like what kind of the Talley agricultural world was like when you were growing up?
Sure. So, gosh, I grew up in a family that was really devoted to vegetable farming, and though my father had planted an avocado orchard in front of his house, which would become the future site of Rosemary's Vineyard, and I do remember running around and playing in that orchard, but really most of my experience was in vegetable farming, and I actually started working on the farm officially when I was 12 years old.
Amazing. So did you know at that point that like you wanted to farm, that you wanted, or and I guess just as much that you wanted to farm with your family and be a part of the family tradition?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I figured out very early on was that my dad had the best job of anybody I knew. And so I knew that I wanted to do that. And then once I went out of town to go to school, I ended up going to school up in Berkeley. Had an opportunity to go to work in a wine shop, and just got bitten by the wine bug. And coincidentally, we had started planting wine grapes in 1982 when I was still in high school, but we actually made our first wines in 1986 when I was up in Berkeley.
And so, like, did you go and get the job at the wine shop because you thought that that would have a connection to like what you would be growing and making at Tally, or was it just kind of coincidental, or did that spur the family to move in that direction?
Well, it was interesting. It was actually a really good idea that our original winemaker Steve Rasmussen had. He had grown up in the Berkeley area, specifically Kensington, and I had my first job off the farm was working in a wholesale meat freezer. Because I could drive forklifts and pallet jacks and operate the other equipment had there. And after doing that for a semester, I decided, well, that job kind of sucked, and it was a little ways from my house. And he said, why don't you go to work in a wine shop? That's how you would learn a lot about wine in a very short period of time. And he was absolutely right.
So when in that era, like you were at college, you were working at this wine shop, like was there a formalized path for you to come back and work with the family, or was it assumed that it would just happen? Like how did it work? Was there were there any hoops you needed to jump through? Like were the expectations clear that as soon as you were able, you were expected to be back there? What was it like?
Well, it was very interesting because my father was very subtle about this. He didn't put any pressure on me to come back. I think my father, who passed away in 2006, was a very, very wise leader and a wise father. And he knew enough about my personality to know that if he was going to try to force me to do anything, that was probably the opposite of
Yeah.
what was going to happen, at least for some period of time. And so it was just always presented as an opportunity as opposed to an obligation. I will tell you now that we are welcoming members of the fourth generation into the business. We do actually have a very clearly stated expectation that folks will complete a bachelor's degree and be somewhere else for at least 2 years after that before we consider any opportunities, full-time opportunities in the business. Everybody though is still expected to come to work in the business when they're 12 years old. And so we still
Perfect.
got the child labor thing going, big time.
Great. Well, farms are exempt from most of those laws anyway.
Right.
So there's so many parallels to what you're describing to what the way that my dad kind of treated his businesses and me. I always thought of the analogy of him sort of holding open the door and showing me what was on the other side, but never making me feel like he was pushing me through it. And I agree, it's the only way that I think it can work.
Well, especially when you're dealing with young guys. I mean, I don't know what you were like as a teenager. I was completely obnoxious, and I have apologized to my mother on numerous occasions for being, such a jerk in those days. But I really in sort of a rebellious mode, and I love the analogy as you explained it, the holding the door open, but no pressure to walk through there.
So, was there a moment, like whether it was working at that wine shop or before or after, where you had sort of an aha, I get what wine is all about, kind of crystallization?
Well, one of those aha moments for me actually happened with a bottle of 1985 Knudsen Erath. I believe it was called the Vintner's Select Pinot Noir,
Okay.
which was a stunning example of Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley. And, like a lot of people, a lot of young guys, when I got into wine, I was just obsessed with like Bordeaux and bigger, more robust reds. And to taste such a beautiful example of ethereal Pinot Noir, and that just really rocked my world. And then the other thing that was happening was being in a wine shop in a retail, wine situation. And have you ever worked in that context?
I have not ever worked in wine retail. I've worked in restaurants, and
Okay.
obviously at wineries, but never retail.
And so, and that was the one regret I had, was never working in a restaurant. But working in a retail wine shop, and I know you've been on plenty of sales calls, you know what happens. People are just walking through the door all the time. In fact, sometimes there's more sales reps than there are customers.
Right.
And so, I got a lot of exposure to that, got to taste a whole lot of wine, and just kind of got to see how people, did this work. And so there was a lot of learning.
Um, so can you talk a little bit about kind of what the scope is of Talley Vineyards now? Like how much you have planted, what grapes you focus on, what like the balance between estate and non-estate? What's the scale?
Okay. So we are growing, we've got 120 acres under vine now in 7 different vineyard sites. Everything that we produce is estate grown. And the focus of the winery is estate grown Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And one shift that's happened for those of us who've followed us over the years is that once we gained approval of the San Luis Obispo Coast AVA in 2022, we were able to incorporate fruit from our vineyards in the Edna Valley into that estate bottling. Historically, the AVA on those wines was a Royal Grande Valley. So that gave us a little bit more flexibility, and quite frankly, I think improved our quality a little bit just by adding that dimension from the Edna Valley.
And is that mix of mostly Pinot and Chardonnay, was that what your dad originally planted, or is that something that he came to later, or you came to when you joined?
So when my dad started planting the vines in 1982, he planted Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc. He was planting Sauvignon Blanc because in those days it was actually hard to buy Chardonnay vines. He planted Riesling for my grandfather, who sort of greenlighted this whole project and loved Riesling. And then he planted the variety that every vintner in California had to plant in the 1980s, which was Cabernet Sauvignon. And the only problem with our Cabernet was that it tasted just like the bell peppers that were famous for growing on our farm. And it turns out people, they want all their bell pepper flavor in peppers that they eat as opposed to in their wine. So yeah, pretty high pyrazines, not enough, heat units down here to adequately ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. So we did that for 2 years, never commercially released, and grafted that over to Riesling.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how about you? What's the scope of what you do on a, I don't know, weekly, monthly basis?
So my title is CEO of both Talley Farms and Talley Vineyards. But the way I describe it, Talley Farms is now, in terms of revenue and scope and everything, about 5 times the size of Talley Vineyards. And I describe my role at Talley Farms as really much more like the chairman of our board of directors. I have 2 cousins who are my business partners in my generation that really run the day-to-day operations. Ryan Talley is, for all intents and purposes, our director of operations, chief operating officer, and then his brother Todd is really a wonderful CFO. My mother is still very active in that business, and ironically, even though she was the co-founder with my dad of Talley Vineyards, her whole focus of her career has been on that side of our business, even to the point where she established our sales and marketing program for Talley Farms back in the late 1970s.
Well, we are proud recipients of one of the Talley Farm Share boxes on Fridays, so I can testify to the value of that.
For your support there. And that's actually a newer initiative for us that started in 2012. And a lot of people think that that's really the scope of what we do. That's actually about 10% of Talley Farms. The other 90% is wholesale produce sales. And then we also operate orchards with lemons and avocados. And that's a fairly significant portion of what we do as well.
So if you're just acting kind of as chairman of the board of that larger operation, does that mean that you spend the majority of your time on the vineyard side?
I do. Yeah. And so, for instance, tomorrow we're having a strategic planning meeting at Talley Farms. And so I will spend the day there really listening to our strategic advisor, taking our team through, the strategic planning exercise that many of us have been through. And it's really a great way for me to really understand what's going on, have a little bit of input about that plan, and just absorb what people are really working on. Most days I check in there in the morning and then spend the majority of my time at the winery.
Cool. Are there pieces in that wine world that you particularly find yourself gravitating towards? A vineyard versus cellar versus sales versus marketing versus business? Or do you feel like the variety of all of those is what makes the job appealing, or somewhere in between?
Well, as I think about my career, I have worn all 3 of the hats to one extent or another over the years. Right now, I happen to be wearing the hat of national sales manager. I have to admit, it's not an area of strength for me. There's increasingly parts of that job related to distributor management, and that piece, I see you nodding your head, you know about that. I'm not really very good at that, and it's tedious. And so anyway, I've gone through phases where I've been very, very focused, especially between, I would say, about 2001 and 2005 in particular, where I knew we needed to up our game on the vineyard side of our business. And so really focused on that. And then really in the early 90s, when I came back to the business, I became the GM here in 1991. I really, I had fallen under the sort of the spell of Jim Clendenin, and came to believe that the best way to make Chardonnay and Pinot Noir was the classical Burgundian approach. And so really working with Steve Rasmussen, who was our winemaker at the time, to create an approach to winemaking that was more classical, more old world. And so really between 1992 and about 1996 or so, that was a lot of focus was on the winemaking side. And, so what I see is it just kind of moves around between those 3 legs of the stool, as it were.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that I've always admired about you is how active you are in the community, and not just the community of other wineries, but in the broader community that supports the wineries. Can you talk a little bit about the fund for vineyard and farm workers that you and Janine set up?
Sure. Yeah, so that was an initiative that we created in 2004, and it really partly it was inspired for two reasons. One is Janine had joined the founding board of directors for the Community Foundation of San Luis Obispo County, and two, Archie McLaren, who was the executive director of the Central Coast Wine Classic, had approached me, asking me for my input about where they might want to direct some of the funds that they were generating, especially as they moved away from KCBX as their main beneficiary. And as I really looked, I said, well, we should give it to people that work in the vineyards because that's the underpinning of our entire industry. What we realized was there wasn't really a good place or a good way to do that. And so that's why we created the Fund for Vineyard and Farm Workers. The endowment is now over $1 million. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I can't remember how much money we've actually given away. This year, it'll be on the order of about $35,000 in grants that we make to nonprofits that support the farm worker community in San Luis Obispo County. And thank you for asking. I think it's something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, it's just a remarkable achievement. Congratulations. For people who want to learn more about that, is there like a website? What's the best way for them if they want to get involved or if they want to contribute?
If you Google San Luis Obispo County Fund for Vineyard and Farm Workers, or go to the Community Foundation, San Luis Obispo County Community Foundation, they have a subpage there. We really don't have as much information up on our website about that as we should. I'm looking at my daughter who she we're both a little sheepish about this right now. Or, just email me and we'll get back to you about. Thank you for asking that.
Awesome. So you were also, if I remember right, one of the founders of World of Pinot Noir back. I don't remember. Was that like 99 or 2000?
Yeah, it was in 2000, and Archie McLaren was that was the thing we worked on together. He actually called me up one day and said, "Hey, how would you feel about creating a world-class Pinot Noir event here in San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties?" And so that was the impetus of that. And it's just amazing how that has evolved and grown, in 25 years.
And the next one's coming up in just a couple
It,
weeks.
it is. And unfortunately, I am actually going to miss it. But Elizabeth, so my daughter, who works with me here full time now, and Eric Johnson will be there. Eric's actually doing a seminar, I believe, a Chardonnay White Burgundy type seminar on Friday. Yes.
Cool. Can you talk? You mentioned Archie a couple of times. I think probably people who are in the Central Coast wine community will know him, but I feel like maybe outside of that circle, he's not as well known, and yet he was a giant of wine in California for a long time. Can you talk a little bit about him?
Sure. Archie had such an amazing impact. I think he probably had the most significant impact for wine in the Central Coast from early 80s up until things really started to take off up in your neighborhood. And the thing that Archie did that I think was so great was he brought the best winemakers and the best chefs in the world, and just included our wines, all of our wines from Santa Barbara County up to Paso Robles, in the mix. And his message was, these are world-class wines that belong on the table with the greatest wines of the world. And it was just such a positive and powerful message. So that's who Archie was. He was a very eccentric small man that wore a beret because he was bald. And he was self-conscious about that. But yeah, that was Archie McLaren.
Yeah, there's a cool story that I rediscovered recently about some of his own history. Has this wild personal history, really, really fascinating. Anyway, that's probably enough off topic that we can't go too far into it. But if people do not know him, it's worth Googling Archie McLaren and reading about his life, because it was a cool one.
He had a huge impact on our industry.
So when we talked to make sure that all the technology was going to work, you teased a new idea that you have, which I think you said you were calling why how wine can save the world.
Can we all see this here?
Wine can save the world. Amazing.
Right. It's a very simple message, and this really came out of a podcast that I was doing in New York in the fall with a gentleman, an old friend of mine named John Coyle, and we were just kind of talking about some of the challenges in the industry, and I just off the top of my head, I just uttered this thing. Come on, dude. I mean, wine can save the world. And so it's been this sort of fun, I guess, antidote to, let's face it, some of the heaviness that has been coming down. And I'm trying to keep this sort of fun and light, but I do think that there are some I guess maybe more serious elements of this. I mean, wine, in my opinion, enjoys a special place as a product, as a beverage that brings people together in a unique way. Yeah. That I don't think others do. And so, that's part of the message. I think that wine, the wine industry has taken very much a leadership position in terms of sustainability. And I that, what you guys are doing at Tobless Creek really, really brings a spotlight to that. And I think we lead in terms, in both ag and in the beverage industry and our commitment to sustainability. And then I can't think of another product that really supports local communities the way that wine does. And whether we're talking about something like the Central Coast Wine Classic, or on a bigger scale, the Napa Valley Wine Auction and the Naples Winter Wine Fest, just those two events together have raised $500 million in their history. That's wine. And wine is really, really unique in accomplishing those things. And if all we need to do to save the world is drink more wine.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
A pushback to Dry January and some of the other things that are going on. Wine has changed my life, and I think it has that opportunity for other folks as well.
I love it. I haven't talked about it in those specific terms, but I think there's a couple of ways in which I often talk about wine that ties in perfectly with that. One is that, like, wine, just by the size of the bottles, it is something which you consume together with other people, and it enhances a meal. It's done in a way that's, as you mentioned, pretty different than the way that beer and spirits is typically consumed.
Right.
And then it is made from fruit. It is grown in specific places, and I think, more than any other product that I can think of, like the choices that a grower makes in a vineyard translate through to the finished product in a way that people, I think, can intuitively understand that if you are farming better, you are making positive contributions to your soil, that's going to have a positive impact on the vines. It's not a choice between farming the right way or making the best wines that you can make. They're entirely compatible with each other. And so I do think that wine has a real opportunity to lead in the communication of and the adoption of things like regenerative farming. That's, I think, how agriculture becomes a part of the solution to a lot of the world's most pressing problems.
Right. Well, and I always like to remind people that if it weren't for agriculture, we wouldn't have civilization. I mean, that's basically, we created civilization. So, in my opinion, I realize that I'm also in the business of growing food for a living. And so I don't want to understate the importance of food, but you're absolutely right. Wine is what enhances that food, what enhances the connection that folks have over food.
Yeah.
I can't think of another product that reflects its place, and also, quite frankly, the growing season that allowed us to produce the product. Every year is different, and in the kinds of wines that you and I make, that's really reflected in the finished product.
Maybe a little more than in like bell peppers or carrots or
right,
avocados.
Right. Or some of the other products that people are producing. I mean, let's face it, with beer and spirits, I mean, people are really aiming for this consistency, where it tastes the same, all the time, as opposed to, every vintage that we produce is a unique story that we tell.
Cool. I love it. Love it. So you mentioned a little bit earlier that you now have at least one of your daughters working with you full time. I'm wondering, like, is the way that you joined the family and the family business, like, is that informing? Like you mentioned that there's now a more formal process requiring that people work elsewhere for a while. Like, I'm wondering, like, does your own experience inform the changes that you've made in incorporating the next generation?
Well, it is a combination of my own experience. I mean, I think I certainly gained a lot by working for other folks. And, partly that was the experience just in general, having a different boss.
Yeah.
But then there was the more technical aspect. I mean, I really learned things about wine that, helped, further my growth and development. The other thing is that as we have engaged experts to help us with our succession and our quite frankly our sustainability of our business, it's really considered a best practice now in multi-generational family businesses to have the next generation gain some outside experience before they come back to the business. So that's really where those things came. And I wanted to add, so in addition to Elizabeth, she has three cousins that are focused on the vegetable farming side. One of them helps his father in terms of our production. The other one actually helps me, really oversees our orchards. And then the third is actually in our sales office. So that space that my mother created back in 1976, that's where he works.
And that's exactly really what the Perrins now do at Beaucastel. I mean, it was, I think, necessitated by the fact that, I mean, instead of two brothers of my dad's generation, there's now 7 kids of the next generation, and they had to figure out, like, there had to be some structure, and they now require that the next generation go out and work someplace else for at least a couple of years, and then come back and essentially apply to rejoin the business and justify what it is that they're going to bring that none of the other family members who are already there are doing.
Wow.
Like so they basically have to sit in front of their cousins and uncles and say, okay, here's what I've done, here's what I'm bringing, here's why I should be allowed back into this business, and what I'm prepared to bring, which it sounds pretty intense, but I think it's also the way of making sure you just don't have this kind of entitlement, which I think is the enemy of multi-generational businesses.
I would agree with with that, and that was a thing that I was, very, very sensitive about. And I mean, if as I've compared notes with other folks, I mean, I've heard of a family business where they said that the person had to be promoted within wherever they were working like 3 times before they would be eligible. And I think in our case, it's just more in keeping with our culture to have a little bit more relaxed approach. And then in terms of there has to be an opportunity. The kid doesn't just get to say, okay, I'm done with my 2 years, where's my job? It's like, we don't have a job right now. Keep doing what you're doing or go find something else to do. We'll don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah. Cool. So I cannot believe that it has been a half an hour, but it has been a half an hour already. I would happily sit and talk to you all afternoon, but I'm assuming you probably have other things that you would like to do. But before we go, are there any new projects that you're working on, or anything new that you're excited about that you want to share that we haven't talked about yet?
My daughter's sitting here, coaxing these things. We're starting to do more events here than we've done before, and we've got a couple of cool things like what we call our secret spot dinner, really inspired by kind of outstanding in the field. The idea is that we change the venue every year. So the first year we did this at the Avila Lighthouse. And we did one in a commercial flower nursery down in Napomo. Last year, where did we do it last year? Oh, we did it at a lavender farm in the Edna Valley. So the idea is that there's a reveal much closer to the event as to where it's actually going to be. So that's a fun one that we do. We've started more of a fun music focused kind of a event in the summertime. Last year's theme was class of 1984 high school reunion. Just so happened that I was in the class of 1984. So, makes a lot of sense. I think this year we're doing kind of a 90s country theme for that. So, we're starting to do a lot of stuff like that, or just, music on Sundays around the Adobe. So it's a nice mix of just welcoming people out here. I'm very, very proud of the wines that we make. On the other hand, I think we also, there are folks that just want to be in wine country and have a little bit more relaxed, kind of experience with wine. So we want to welcome that.
And that's also, I think, a really good practice, given that one of the challenges, one of the headwinds that the wine community is facing is that a lot of the demographic that has been our main buyers over the last 25 years are kind of aging out of prime wine buying years. And so giving people who maybe are interested in wine but not yet committed, like, great opportunities to come and engage at wineries and in wine country is, I think, really smart.
Right. Well, thank you. And in terms of other new stuff, and you mentioned continuing this conversation, at some point here pretty soon, I'm going to hit you up for a conversation about wine can save the world. And we're still kind of working out exactly what the format of that looks like, but it'll be an opportunity for you to share your thoughts on that. So we do get to continue some element of this. So.
Awesome. So people who want to learn more about Talley Vineyards or Talley Farms, what's the best way for them to do that?
TalleyVineyards.com, TalleyFarms.com. And then when you go to Talley Farms, it's probably best to go to TalleyFarmsFreshHarvest.com. That's really our direct-to-consumer focus, the harvest box like you get. And that's where most people are directed. If you end up on the wholesale side, the produce side, you can, I think, search for Fresh Harvest in there and we'll get you redirected. So, and then we've got some really great social media. Our Instagram handle is just Talley Vineyards. That's a good place to check out what we're doing. And for those people that are still active on TikTok, what's our TikTok handle? Talley Vineyards. Yeah.
I love the consistency.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Brian, such a pleasure. Thank you for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday afternoon. Good luck in this next rainstorm. I hope it's lovely and thorough and not too much, and that our paths cross in real life soon.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. This has just been such a wonderful opportunity to chat with you, and have a great afternoon.
You too, Brian. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you. I'll be back in 3 weeks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.